You felt it before. The conversation that started as a simple question and ended with your hands shaking, your throat tight, and a strange, hollow feeling in your chest, as though something essential was quietly siphoned away while you were busy defending a point you didn't even care about 10 minutes ago. You replayed the exchange for hours afterward, crafting the perfect response, the airtight rebuttal, the explanation that would finally make them understand. But somewhere beneath the rehearsal, a quieter voice whispered, "Why did that feel less like dialogue and more like being drained?" There's a particular kind of person who seems to come alive in friction, not in the collaborative spark of two minds building together, but in the heat of opposition itself. The more you offer clarity, the more they pivot. The more you extend patience, the more they press. If you've been raised to believe that care means showing up, that integrity means engaging, that walking away is failure, then you'll stay. You'll keep breathing oxygen onto a fire, never designed to warm, only to consume. Here's the truth they don't tell you in the books about communication. Some fires don't want to be understood. They want to be fed. Every measured response, every good faith clarification, every attempt to bridge the gap becomes another gust of wind under the flame. You think you're building understanding. You're actually fueling a system that runs on your attention, your doubt, your need to be seen as reasonable. The fire doesn't care about your argument. It cares that you're still standing close enough to burn. And you do burn. Not all at once, but slowly. The blurring of your thoughts mid-conversation. The heart that races not with anger, but with a strange, spinning urgency. An alarm without a clear source. You walk away feeling smaller, less certain, as though the floor of your own mind became unsteady. You might not even remember what the disagreement was about, only that you lost something in it. Not the argument. Something older. Some quiet sense of your own solidity. This isn't about intelligence. It's not about who had the better point. It's about recognizing the shape of the exchange itself, the engine beneath the words. Some people don't converse to arrive somewhere. They converse to keep you arriving again and again, in a loop that never resolves because resolution was never the goal. The goal is the game. The goal is your presence in it, your attention, your effort. The goal is that you haven't walked away yet. You've been taught to see this as a problem to fix. If you could find the right words, the right tone, the right approach, maybe the dynamic would shift. Maybe they'd soften. Maybe you'd finally belong in the warmth you keep hoping will appear. But belonging that requires you to constantly prove, explain, or contort isn't belonging. It's an audition that never ends. The cost of staying isn't just your time. It's your clarity, your steady ground, the part of you that knows what's true before words begin. The wisdom here isn't about winning. It's not even about being right. It's about seeing the fire for what it is, and stepping back before you mistake the heat for light. Not with bitterness. Not with a story about being too sensitive or not strong enough. But with the simple, grounded recognition that some systems thrive on your participation, and choosing not to feed them is not abandonment. It's discernment. It's sovereignty. So how do we carry this awareness without shutting down, without armoring so thick we lose our own tenderness? You stepped back from the fire, but the heat follows you home. That night, lying in bed, your mind replays the conversation in high definition. Every phrase you should have said, every moment you could have pivoted, every opening you missed. Your heart is still racing 3 hours later, your body humming with a low-grade alarm it can't shut off, because somewhere deep in your wiring, the exchange isn't over. It's still happening. And this is where the real cost begins. Not in the moment of conflict, but in the vast, invisible tax it extracts long after the words have stopped. If you're wired with a sensitive nervous system, you already know your body doesn't distinguish cleanly between a physical threat and a conversational one. The same adrenaline that would help you outrun danger floods your veins when someone baits you with a half-truth, a loaded question, a comment engineered to provoke. Your hands shake. Your stomach tightens. Your thoughts scatter like birds startled from a branch. What looks from the outside like a simple debate feels, inside your body, like survival. And survival mode is expensive. It burns through your reserves, your focus, your creativity, your capacity for rest, like an engine redlining in neutral, all combustion and no forward motion. The person who needed the friction, they've already moved on. Maybe they felt a little thrill, a little juice, a momentary sense of mattering. Maybe they're already hunting the next exchange, the next spark. But you carry it. Not because you're weak. Because you're porous. Because your system was built to read subtlety, to track undercurrents, to feel the emotional weather in a room before it has a name. That's your gift. It's also, when aimed at the wrong target, your danger. Sensitivity is radar, not armor. It tells you what's coming. It was never meant to absorb the blast. Here's the trick. Engaging feels like agency. It feels like you're doing something, standing for something, refusing to be silenced or dismissed. In a world that monetizes outrage, that turns every disagreement into a referendum on your values, opting out looks like cowardice. The marketplace wants your reaction. It wants your clicks, your comments, your presence in the arena, because attention is currency and the house always takes a cut. You think you're defending truth. You're actually paying rent inside someone else's profit model. The longer you stay at the table, the more chips you slide across the felt, the more you convince yourself that the next hand will break even, but the house sets the odds. The house wins when you keep playing. The house wins even when you walk away carrying the belief that you lost. This is the double life so many of us know too well. On the surface, you perform certainty. You show up with your points organized, your tone measured, your evidence ready. You play the role of the reasonable one, the patient explainer, the person who can hold space for hard conversations. But beneath that performance, you're hemorrhaging. Your sleep fractures. Your creative work stalls. The project that actually matters, the one aligned with your deepest calling, sits untouched while you burn hours drafting replies to someone who will never, ever concede. You tell yourself it's about integrity, but integrity isn't performing endurance in a system designed to exhaust you. Integrity is living your truth, not arguing for the right to hold it. The mystic knows something the marketplace will never teach you. Clarity isn't produced through combat. Clarity is what remains when you stop defending it. The more you try to force understanding in a space that penalizes understanding, the fuzzier your own inner knowing becomes. You start second, guessing not just your argument, but your perception. Maybe you misread the tone. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe if you were stronger, clearer, better, this wouldn't land so hard. The gaslighting isn't always overt. Sometimes it's just the slow erosion of your trust in your own nervous system, your own read of the room, your own boundary that said, "This doesn't feel right," before your mind tried to logic it into acceptability. And then there's the reputation cost. You worry that if you disengage, you'll be labeled too sensitive, unable to handle pushback, fragile. In communities that valorize debate, that treat intellectual sparring as intimacy, stepping back can feel like exile. But here's what no one tells you. The people who respect your boundaries won't weaponize your absence. The ones who do were never safe to begin with. You're not losing belonging. You're exposing the fact that it was always conditional on your compliance, your availability, your willingness to absorb what they need to expel. The mission drift is the quietest thief. You came here to this life, this work, this earth with something to offer that has nothing to do with being right in a comment section. Something slower. Something that doesn't scale. A way of seeing, a quality of presence, a piece of beauty or truth that can only emerge when you're not spending your days in combat. Every hour you invest in an unwinnable argument is an hour you're not spending in the garden, the manuscript, the conversation with someone who actually wants to meet you. The fire doesn't care about your mission. It only cares that you're still close enough to burn. You think you're engaging because it matters. But the body keeps score. The sleepless nights, the clenched jaw, the low-grade dread that hums underneath your day, these aren't badges of honor. They're receipts. And the cost isn't just neurological. It's spiritual. It's the slow forgetting of what you came here to do, buried under the rubble of what you feel obligated to defend. So what does it actually look like to stop paying, to walk away from the table while you still have chips left? The hardest part of walking away from the table isn't leaving. It's the belief that if you do, you've abandoned something sacred. But what if the entire frame is wrong? What if the exhaustion, the rumination, the spiritual hemorrhaging aren't signs that you need to try harder, but signals that you're fighting a current never meant to be overpowered? There's a reason lifeguards teach swimmers caught in a rip current to swim parallel to the shore, not toward it. The instinct is to fight straight back, to muscle through the pull, to prove you're strong enough to win. But the ocean doesn't care about your resolve. The current doesn't respect effort. It's not personal. It's mechanical. And the swimmer who survives isn't the one with the most stamina. It's the one who reads the water, recognizes the shape of the force, and moves sideways out of its grip. The one who understands that sometimes the shortest path to safety is perpendicular to the destination. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Some people do not want resolution. They want the charge. The friction itself is the point. Not because they're monsters or because something is wrong with them, but because that's the engine their nervous system has learned to run on. Conflict produces adrenaline. Adrenaline produces aliveness. For someone wired that way, your calm is boring. Your nuance is evasive. Your boundary is a challenge. They're not listening for your point. They're listening for the next place to wedge in, the next opening to spark the exchange back to heat. You think you're building a bridge. They think you're playing doubles tennis. And no amount of good faith will turn a game into a crossing. This isn't judgment. It's taxonomy. A fire isn't evil for burning. A rip current isn't malicious for pulling. But you don't stand in either and call it connection. You don't mistake the surge for intimacy. And you don't exhaust yourself trying to turn the ocean into a lake. Seeing the pattern clearly, naming it without the compulsion to fix it, is not cynicism. It's mercy. For them, and for you. The urgency you feel, that tightness in your chest that screams, "I have to respond, I have to correct this, I have to make them see," that urgency is the current talking. It's the undertow of a system that thrives on your reaction speed, your sleeplessness, your belief that silence equals complicity. But urgency and importance are not the same. Urgency is often someone else's timer strapped to your wrist, ticking down to a deadline that was never yours. Patience, real patience, isn't passivity. It's refusal to let someone else's tempo dictate your clarity. It's the breath between stimulus and response where you remember, I get to choose what I feed. Here's where the metaphor becomes practice. The next time you feel the pull, the comment that lands like a hook in your chest, the question designed to trap rather than explore, the conversation that leaves you buzzing and unsteady, pause. Not to craft the perfect reply, but to name what's happening. Say it silently, like a tether. This is a rip current. Feel where it wants to drag you. Notice the urgency, the tightness, the spinning. Then ask, quietly, what happens if I swim sideways? What happens if I don't fight this head-on? You're not running. You're not collapsing. You're reorienting. You're choosing a different stroke. Sometimes that means stepping back from the thread. Sometimes it means letting the last word go unclaimed. Sometimes it means saying less, offering nothing for the friction to catch on, and watching the charge dissipate when there's no fuel left to burn. This is seeing versus fixing. Fixing assumes the problem is solvable if you just find the right lever. Seeing knows that some dynamics aren't problems to solve, but patterns to recognize and step out of. You can see someone clearly, can even hold compassion for the wiring that makes them crave conflict, and still choose not to be their sparring partner. Witnessing is not the same as participation. You don't owe your presence to every fire that calls your name. And here's the permission so many of us need. Stepping back is not isolation. Isolation is vanishing into bitterness, closing off, deciding everyone is unsafe and nothing is worth the risk. Solitude, the kind that restores, is choosing your own company and the company of those who don't require you to perform, defend, or collapse in order to belong. It's the clearing where you remember what your nervous system feels like when it's not flooded. It's the quiet that lets you hear your own voice again, the one buried under months of rehearsed rebuttals. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to explain why you're not engaging anymore, why you're letting the thread go quiet, why you're no longer available for the dance. The people who love you without needing your friction will understand. The ones who don't, well, their confusion is information, not obligation. Swim sideways. Let the current rage beside you. Save your strength for the shore. But what does that actually look like when the pattern is embedded not in a stranger online, but in someone you share a table with, a family with, a history with? Recognition without action is just a prettier cage. You've named the current, you've felt the pull, you've understood that some fires want fuel, not resolution, but now you're standing at the edge of the hardest question. What do you actually do when the person feeding on friction isn't a stranger in a comment section, but someone across your kitchen table, someone in your family text thread, someone woven into the fabric of your daily life? Here's the image that holds the answer. A lighthouse in a storm. The waves crash. The wind howls. The sea rages with all the fury and chaos the night can summon. And the lighthouse does not argue. It does not explain itself to the water. It does not dim its beam to make the storm feel heard, and it does not topple trying to calm what it was never built to control. It stands. It shines. Its power is not in changing the weather. It's in remaining steady enough to guide what's worth guiding, unmoved by what cannot be moved. You are not here to wrestle the sea. You're here to be the light that doesn't go out when the waves hit. This is belonging versus authenticity in its rawest form. Belonging, the kind we were taught to crave, often asks us to adjust our beam, dim it, angle it differently, flicker in rhythm with someone else's storm so they feel less alone in their chaos. Authenticity is the beam that doesn't waver, not because it's cruel, but because a lighthouse that changes direction with every gust is no longer a guide. It's just another thing lost in the dark. The people who need your light, really need it, aren't asking you to prove it by drowning. They're looking for the steady point. the thing that doesn't collapse when tested. So let's make this practical. Someone says something designed to provoke. You feel the charge rise in your chest, the old urgency that says respond now, defend now, clarify now, or lose the moment. This is where the first practice lives, quiet and unglamorous. The pause. Not forever. Not as punishment or withholding. Just long enough to let the adrenaline crest and fall. Long enough for your nervous system to stop screaming threat and start whispering choice. 24 hours is the shape this often takes. A full rotation of the earth. A sleep cycle. A morning. You don't announce it. You don't make a show of it. You simply notice the hook, feel the pull, and say internally, gently, I'll come back to this when I'm not deciding from the current. What happens in that space is alchemy. The thing that felt urgent at 11 p.m., that had your hands shaking as you drafted the reply, often looks different by noon the next day. Sometimes it evaporates entirely. The bait so obvious in retrospect, you're startled you almost bit. Sometimes it clarifies into something simple, something that doesn't require a manifesto, just a boundary delivered without apology or elaboration. I'm not going to debate this. I see it differently, and that's okay. I'm stepping back from this conversation. Not hostile. Not superior. Just clear. The lighthouse doesn't justify its position every time a wave crashes. It holds it. But here's where it gets tender. What about the people you love? The ones whose friction isn't malicious, just habitual? The family member who turns every dinner into an ideological spar, the old friend who needs to one-up every story, the partner who can't let a comment land without correcting, revising, reframing it into conflict? You don't want to exile them. You don't want to become so boundaried you're just alone on a rock, untouchable and cold. This is the fear that keeps so many of us trapped, that choosing ourselves means losing everyone else. The lighthouse answers this, too. It doesn't abandon the sailors. It doesn't refuse to shine. But it also doesn't leave the shore and swim out into the storm to personally escort every ship. It offers what it has, light, position, constancy, and trusts that what's seaworthy will find its way. Your job is not to save people from their own patterns. Your job is to stop pretending those patterns don't cost you something, and to honor what you actually have to give without dissolving in the effort. This is seeing without fixing. You can see that your brother feels alive in argument, that sparring is the only intimacy he knows how to build, and still choose not to be his opponent. You can witness your mother's need to be right, can even understand the wounds underneath it, and still refuse to be the canvas she paints her certainty on. Witnessing doesn't require participation. Compassion doesn't require collapse. You can love someone and also know that every conversation with them leaves you scraped hollow, and you can let that knowing shape how much, how often, and in what context you show up. Here's what that looks like in the room. You're at the table. The comment comes. You feel the hook. Instead of taking the bait, you let it land in the air between you and simply. Don't pick it up. Maybe you change the subject. Maybe you smile softly and say, maybe so, and take a sip of your drink. Maybe you let the silence do the work, trusting that the absence of your reaction will either diffuse the charge or reveal it for what it is. The first time you do this, it will feel like failure, like you abandoned the truth, like you let them win. But you're not playing the game anymore. You're standing outside it. And from that position, you can see what you couldn't see from inside the current. How much of the fight was never about the topic at all, just the heat. Some relationships will adjust. The person who's used to your engagement will flail for a bit, will test the new boundary, will try to pull you back into the familiar dance. If there's love underneath the pattern, if there's genuine care beneath the friction, they'll eventually meet you in the new territory. Slowly, awkwardly, but they'll come. And some won't. Some people can only relate through conflict, and when you stop providing it, the relationship reveals itself as thinner than you hoped. That grief is real. Honor it. But don't let it convince you to go back to the fire. The 24-hour hold isn't about perfection. You'll slip. You'll get pulled in. You'll spend a Tuesday night rage typing a reply you'll regret by Wednesday. That's fine. You're not trying to become untouchable. You're trying to become steady. The lighthouse doesn't shame itself when a wave crashes higher than expected. It doesn't crumble in self-judgment. It breathes, it holds, and it shines again the next moment. This is patience over urgency, not as a moral achievement, but as a nervous system practice, as a way of living that lets you stay in your own integrity without performing certainty, without pretending you have it all figured out, without needing to win in order to be whole. You guide by stance, not by argument, by what you're willing to feed and what you're willing to let starve, by the quiet refusal to betray your own ground just to keep someone else comfortable in their storm. The waves will rage. Let them. Your work is the beam. So where does this leave us? Not just in theory, but in the living shape of a life. The lighthouse doesn't resent the storm for being a storm, and you don't have to resent the people in your life for running on friction. But you also don't have to be the shore they break against. There's a third way, quieter than fighting and warmer than exile, and it lives in the space between what you've been taught love requires and what your nervous system knows it can actually sustain. You've spent so long in the market square, the place where voices compete, where volume equals value, where every silence is mistaken for weakness and every boundary reads as betrayal. The algorithms want you there. The outrage economy needs you there. Even the people who love you may want you there, because your presence in the fray makes them feel less alone in their own chaos. But the market square will never tell you the truth the forest clearing knows, that the quietest voice in you, the one buried under years of performance and defense and proving, can only be heard when you stop spending all your hours shouting over noise that was never yours to calm. This is solitude as sanctuary, not isolation as punishment. Isolation says no one is safe, nothing is worth the risk, I'll protect myself by disappearing. Solitude says I'm worth protecting, and sometimes protection looks like choosing less noise and more discernment. It's the difference between slamming the door and simply walking through it with your dignity intact. You're not abandoning the world. You're remembering that you're part of it, and the part you play matters less when you're too depleted to remember why you came. Here's what integration actually looks like. You love your people. You see them clearly, their wounds, their patterns, the friction they need to feel real. And you also see yourself clearly. You know now that some conversations cost more than they yield, that some dynamics run on your depletion, that the most compassionate thing you can offer is sometimes your absence from a loop that needs you confused to keep spinning. You stop being the power source. Not with bitterness. Not with a grand announcement or a social media post about boundaries. Just with the quiet, daily choice to place your attention where it builds rather than burns. The double life ends when you stop performing for the metrics that don't measure what matters. The marketplace counts clicks, replies, how many times you showed up to fight the good fight. The mystic counts something older, the quality of your sleep, the steadiness in your chest, the days you spent aligned with what you came here to do instead of what you felt obligated to defend. Private congruence over public performance. The integrity of a life where your inner and outer worlds aren't at war, where the face you show matches the ground you stand on, where you're not collapsing in secret while smiling for the gallery. You can't control who picks fights. You can't stop the fires from burning or the currents from pulling. But you can choose where you stand and what you feed. You can learn to swim sideways, to let the last word go unclaimed, to love people without financing the patterns that drain you. You can build a life so quiet, so aligned, so ruthlessly gentle that the noise simply has nowhere to land. Not because you've armored up, but because you've remembered what peace feels like and you've decided it's worth protecting. If this resonates, if you're ready to practice exits that don't require cruelty or collapse, subscribe and join the quiet circle. There's a one-page guide waiting, Graceful Exits, with language cues and reflections to help you step back without heat, to honor both your boundaries and your tenderness. The lighthouse is already built. You're just learning to keep the light on.